You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining me once more on Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored for one of the very last times by Trailtopia Adventure Foods. Trailtopia have been such a great partner for us, and we really appreciated them stepping up last November. They extended their original contract to take in the end of Bruce Matson's hike on another of the Hiking Radio Network shows, returning to Katahdin. But that hike is nearly completed. So we're looking for a main sponsor once more, but I can't thank Trailtopia enough for their support of this and our other show. If any of you know who might be a good fit, just drop me a line at steve@hikingradionetwork.com and I will be eternally grateful. Actually, while I'm rhapsodizing about Trailtopia, why not get even sweeter on them? With this, do you remember those times on the trail when you really needed to treat yourself? You know, those days when you fall in the mud or the rain starts running down your neck, the rocks are driving you crazy, or even when you're just fed up. You need a boost. When that happens, stop hiking. Take off your pack and treat yourself to one of Trailtopia's scrumptious desserts. Why not go for Rocky Road pudding, a rich chocolate pudding loaded with mini marshmallows and toasted slivered almonds. By the time you get that into your system, you're going to be warm, toasty and satisfied. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. This week, just like last week, is a longer show than normal, as we're celebrating the next 100 episodes of the show, having celebrated the first 100 episodes last week. It was Light or Not last time, and this time we've got Pat Coate, or T-Bird. Pat was my number one woman on the trail, as she, Ken, Trillium and I made our way together towards our common goals through New Hampshire and Maine. As you heard last week from Ken, Pat, too, felt the need for a team as she got to the trickier mountains and rocks of New England. We all got on so well that the three of us teamed up a year later on our mutually abortive attempt on the John Muir Trail. Pat will be along in a moment. There's another three guests from the fascinating outdoor retailer Summer Market from Denver, with such diverse offerings as an effective mozzie killer, more great food, and a platform to facilitate the hiring of your camping gear. They're going to be along after Pat. The bonus segment this week, and one I hope I'll be able to offer in coming weeks, is from an excellent young guy I met in Denver, Dan Wowack. Dan is from Cold Cracker Bushcraft, and we're putting together a few interviews about bushcraft to help you handle situations in the outdoors that can come up from time to time. Today, we're starting with how to build a fire. Lastly, our story about the Camino, The Year We Seized the Day by Elizabeth Best and Colin Bowles. And we're up to day number 10. We've had the commercials, so let's get on with the show. And I'll introduce you to my friend Pat Coate, or T-Bird. Okay, we're on again with one of the other important people from my hike in 2014. There was Light or Not last week, and this week there's T-Bird. It's Pat Coate. Hi, Pat. How are you?
Hey, very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me, and congrats on the success of your podcast.
So it's as much a surprise to me as it is to you, trust me. So why were you T-Bird, Pat?
Wilderness Hawk came up with that for me. Wilderness Hawk and Cinnamon Girl were two people that I started the trail with, and I had met them through a mutual friend that I golf with. So that's where the T part came from, T-E-E.
Yes. Yeah.
And then they know that I'm an avid birder, so they just kind of put the two together and came up with T-Bird.
Did you look for birds on the trail particularly? I seem to remember you did mention a few of them, and it's one of the things I hadn't even thought about doing beforehand, try to identify the flora and the fauna. You were pretty good at those, I seem to remember.
Yeah, the birds definitely enjoyed. I wished I'd had my binoculars with me. That would be one thing I would like to change as far as equipment. And I looked into, the one lens, something that gets me a little closer to the birds, but definitely was attuned to them. I could identify a lot of the bird song. And of course, hiking through spring, you have a lot of the nesting activity. So I
Right.
was able to see a bunch of different nests along the way of various birds.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know
How
what.
did you spot them then?
Well, some of it is just luck, and some of it is just kind of being aware to the song, or the more the alarm chirps of the birds if you get close to their
Wow.
nest. But
Wow.
in particular, that I don't know if you experienced this too. It was coming through the Smoky Mountains, and you know how some of the trail there is kind of a trench. Well,
Yes,
there's a
yes.
particular bird, a dark-eyed or a junco that would nest. Their nest would be down in the trench, in the sides,
Really?
and
Really?
they would fly right up in front of you a number of times, and then you know to look down, and you could kind of uncover some of the vegetation and see some of the nest. I never or the nest and the eggs. There weren't any hatchlings yet. When we went through there, they were just on the eggs.
I don't know what the rules are over here, but when I was a kid in the UK, my brother was 3 years older than me. He was massively into bird nesting and birds' eggs. And he would go to these nests and take an egg and he would stick a pin in either end and make me blow all the stuff out of it. And so he would save these eggs. I know in the UK now, I know it's illegal. Is it illegal over here as well to take the eggs from a nest?
I don't honestly know the answer to that. It seems like it should be, but I really don't know. I know that it's illegal. You can't collect feathers. You're not supposed to
Really?
like eagle feathers and such. Um, but I don't know about the eggs. It certainly would make sense that you wouldn't be able
Yeah.
to, but I don't know.
He had an extraordinary collection, and basically they're all from me. He made me climb up these trees and I was precariously hanging on to these trees to get these birds' eggs and put them in and trying to shove the bird out while I try to get their eggs. I mean, it's ridiculous. Now think about it, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, what about your hiking background? Had you hiked much before the AT?
Well, I had done quite a bit of hiking, but never backpacked. Early memories growing up were our family vacations were camping. And we would
Right.
we lived in Tennessee for a couple years. We went to the Smoky Mountains. We lived for most of my childhood. I grew up in South Jersey, and we would go up to vacation up in the White Mountains and in southern Maine.
And whose instigation was that? Who was the outdoorsy person in your family?
Well, I think my father definitely was the driver behind that. My mom went along quite happily, but I think my dad was the driver. And I was one of 6 children, so camping was the vacation that we enjoyed doing. And we would go up to the mountains, and then my dad would always take us on hikes there. I remember probably I was maybe 12 or 13 hiking up Mount Washington. I still remember that
Wow.
pretty vividly. I remember it being, nice 70-degree day at the bottom, and boy, it was freezing cold up at the top.
Remember the day we did it?
Oh yeah. When I was a youth, I don't think we saw the rime ice that we saw when we were there, but it was chilly, and it made a definite impression on me, the difference.
I'm sure. So when you went up with your parents and your family and so on, had you before you did the AT, had you done any extensive longer hikes at that time?
No, they've only been day hikes. Just
Wow. You'd never had an overnight?
no, never backpacked. Well, before the AT, I take that back. Never. I trained for the AT, so the summer before I did. I had acquired, various equipment and wanted to do some testing of that. So I did. A friend from here, we went and did the West Rim Trail of the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon. So that was, I think we were out 2 nights. And then we did the Northville Placid Trail in the Adirondacks. And we did half of that. So we did another couple nights there.
What that feel like being out there in the woods by
Oh my
yourself?
gosh, it was amazing. It was funny, the first night that we camped, I said to her, I've never really camped in the woods before. I mean, we've camped at campgrounds, but never
Yeah.
backpacked into some place where you're in the middle of nowhere. And she kind of looked at me like, "Okay, you're not going to freak out on me, are you?" And I was like, "No, I mean, it was really it's very different obviously than a commercial where you've got lots of
Yes, of
other
course.
people and things around. But it's a beautiful, peaceful, the stars. It's just it was I was hooked.
So you actually liked that thing of being in the woods well, not by yourself. You were with a friend, so that does help. Obviously, were there any nights on the AT that you were entirely by yourself at
You
night?
know, it's turned out that there weren't any. It was not by design that way. When I was on my own hiking, there were a couple nights where, I would get to a campsite and I would be the only one there, but somebody always ended up coming later that evening, and it
Yes.
it always ended up being somebody I knew too, which was
Oh,
kinda
really?
interesting. Yes, yeah.
Right. That's cool. That's cool. I remember my first night out camping that year was mile 400.6. And the reason I know that because somebody put the sticks down to 400.6 miles, and I found a campsite, and so I stayed there. It's called Camp Daddy Longlegs or something like that. And I was really nervous that first night, and no one turned up at all. But then you go through the night. I didn't die, so it
Yeah,
kind of worked out okay,
in some ways, I was a little disappointed because I wanted to see how I would react, and, I was fine on my own. I, made dinner and got my tent set up and all that stuff, and, I was doing fine, and so I had actually gone to bed one of the nights, and then a guy that I had met, and we'd kind of been crisscrossing each other for a
Yeah.
couple of days. He came staggering in, and you know, so I had company. And then another time I hiked. This was coming down from the Audie Murphy, that
All right. I
monument.
remember it well.
So
Yes.
you cross a road, and then there's a creek there, and before you get to Dragon's Tooth, and I decided, it's getting kind of late. I'm just gonna find a little spot here off the road and set up
Mm,
camp, and that's
mm.
what I did, and there was some trail magic there. Somebody had left some soda in the little creek. So I had
Nice.
set up and, was enjoying it. It was nice, peaceful night, and, again, somebody that I had kind of crisscrossed, kinda knew. Samurai was his name, and he came again, kinda came in late and said, "Yeah, how about if I join you?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"Absolutely." So,
Did you always
yes.
feel comfortable on the trail?
For the most part, I did. There were 2 times that I, did have a little bit of discomfort, and they were both in New York. I was on my own,
I
and
think it was like with me and Ken.
well, well, I'll get to that one. No, and I was crossing, the Dover Oak. Do you remember that in New York, where you cross a road and it's on the other side of the road, and then you head back into the woods?
Vaguely remember the name, but I don't recall the
Yeah, well, I was
position. Yeah.
crossing the road, and this gentleman in a pickup truck was kind of driving by. Made eye contact, no big deal, and then I was starting to take some pictures. Next thing I know, he kind of pulls over and turns around, and he's coming back, and I'm like,
Oh,
There's nobody around. What's going on?"
yeah. Yeah.
But
Gosh.
he did. He went past me, and then he parked, and I was like, oh well, just suck it up here and just go and keep
Yeah.
going. And if he comes after me, I'll just hike faster, I guess."
Yeah.
But I don't know what he was doing, but I never saw him again. And then that evening, I was setting up camp. There's a nursery there that I guess the person who runs that is somehow connected to the trail. I don't know if he had hiked it before, but he let hikers set up camp there and spend the night.
Was
So I
that
did.
by the AT station? You mean?
Right, yes, right by
Yes,
the
I know
AT
exactly where it
station.
is. I
That's
stayed there
right.
as well. Yeah.
So I went down where he said, and I set up my tent, and then I came back. They had a nice little gazebo, and water. So I was making dinner, and
Yeah. Yeah.
then did some chores, and then I went back to the tent, and where it's set up, there was a fence, but just on the other side of the fence was a place where trucks could pull over and spend the night, like 18-wheelers. So there was
That's right.
somebody
I remember.
literally,
Yeah.
like 10 yards from my tent.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not sure I like this either. So I went
Yeah.
back. I said, well, let's just think about this. And I went back and to get some more water. And again, some folks that I had known on the trail were also coming to get water. They had crossed the road and had gone up into a field to hike. So then I said, they said, why don't you just come and hike with or camp with us? So I'm sure that it would have been fine, but
Yes.
I did
Yes.
camp, or I did
Yeah, you have to
move
be careful.
my
You just have
stuff.
to be aware. I think you have to be aware of your surroundings. That's all. Men and women, but more women, I suspect. But you just have to be aware where you are, don't you?
Yeah, it didn't. I mean, like I said, I'm sure it would have been fine, but it was just a more comfortable night being with folks that I knew, and it was fun. They were a fun group, so we
Good.
had an enjoyable, nice campfire and
Yeah, good.
conversation. So
So, what was it about that summer of 2014 that made it the right time for you to hike the AT? Did you leave a job, or did you take a time off your work? How did you do it?
yeah, things really did align for me for 2014. I had, the AT had been in my mind for years, and I guess it was about 2011 that our local library had the habitual hiker. I don't know if you've run into him. That was his
No,
trail name. He's
good
written a
name.
number of books and he's hiked the AT a number of times. And he came to the library and did a presentation. And that just triggered in my mind. I said, this is it. This has been a lifelong bucket list dream. I'm going to go for it. And I reread Bill Bryson's book and read lots of other AT
Yeah.
books. I was ready for, a career break. It just things lined up from that standpoint. I asked around to my adventuresome friends to see if any of them were at a good point to go with. And it turns out that kind of a friend of a friend, put me on to Joanne and Andy
All
so
right.
that we could, at least talk. They were interested. They were retiring. They were both teachers and
So you
getting.
didn't know them before the trail then?
Not very well. We had met
Mm.
a couple times at friend's house in New Jersey, and just they were incredibly helpful because they're very knowledgeable about backpacking and done a lot of that in their
Yeah,
lives.
they seem to be when I met them. Yeah, seem to be.
Yeah, so we talked gear. They helped me, with they introduced me to the freezer bag cooking, various all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So, we had met a couple times, but we never hiked together. And, they were pretty seasoned hikers and they had a pretty aggressive, itinerary of how many miles they wanted to do. And I was like, I've backpacked like 4 nights.
Yeah, but you kept up with them no problem at all, didn't you? I
Well,
saw you hiking with them.
yeah, because I really didn't know what it was going to be like. I trained pretty hard because we didn't
Yeah.
start till May 1st. So
Oh,
we were
really? I
starting.
didn't know that. Oh
Yeah,
my
because
gosh.
they thought, let's finish in 4.5 months, so they had a very aggressive timetable. And I'm thinking, well, if I'm going to keep up with them, I need to be in shape. They're going to leave me in their dust in day one, and all the other hikers started in February and March and April, and there's going to be me.
You must
So
have really slowed down when you met me in Lighternote then. God, I didn't realise that. God damn me. So you start out with that they became Wilderness Hawk and Cinnamon Girl and T-Bird. You all set out. Did you find yourself joining up with other people, or did you tend towards each other all the time? Once you get into a trail family,
oh,
which
we
was you
definitely,
three,
yeah, definitely got into a trail family. We had quite the hiker bubble. It was really quite fun. Some of the people we had actually met the very first night on the trail, and others in that first probably week or so. And we were together, that bubble, all the way till Harrisburg, Virginia.
yeah,
And it was a fun group. It's not like we hiked with each other, day after
yeah,
day, but you'd
yes, you move in and out of
see
each
them,
other, didn't you?
yeah. And we
Yeah.
would plan on, meeting up in Damascus or whatever, and then go out to dinner. And
Yeah.
it was a really fun group of people. So it was a very nice bubble.
It's interesting. So you started late. You must have either caught people up pretty quickly. Not many people start after May the 1st, do they?
No, no, they're not. If you see the AMC graph, or the Appalachian Trail Conservancy graph, a lot of people are starting. There's a big bubble in March and April, and then tails on either end.
My plan is to start the 1st of March next year, still to try to finish at the same time as we did when we went.
Well, I was happy to start May 1st because they say you pack your fears, and my biggest fear out there was cold. I don't like to be
Yes.
cold,
Yes.
so I thought, well, starting in May,
Yeah.
we'll try to finish by
Yeah.
September. But at least we'll start later and we'll miss the cold. It kind of backfired on us because when we went through the Smoky Mountains, we hit snow and sleet
Yeah.
and hail, and it
I
was
did.
cold.
Yeah.
And the people that left, a month earlier, evidently the weather for them, some of them were telling us that it was really quite nice when they went through.
It's a crapshoot, though, isn't it? You just don't know what you're going to get. It's one of those things. You go when you go, and you, as with everything on the trail, you face it as you face it. There's no choosing it. Somebody once said to me, "Why do you keep checking where you are on the trail? Because it's right there. You either go down, or you go up, or you go flat. That's what you do. And the trail's in front of you, and you take the conditions that are there at the time, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, you really do have to kind of give in to the trail. There's nothing you can do to change it.
Totally,
Just
totally.
enjoy it,
Yeah.
for better or worse.
What do you recall of those early days? Then, were you having fun straight away?
Yeah, I did have a little bit. It definitely was fun. I mean, they're great people to hike with. Really couldn't have asked for better
Yeah, they
hiking
were lovely.
partners.
They were
Really,
lovely.
until
Yeah.
until New Hampshire, of course. But
Of course. Apart from that, yeah.
but yeah, the I my concern at the beginning was just how good a shape am I going to be in compared to them? And are we pushing too fast? Is that going to hurt us down the road? But
Right.
we started off doing, 15 to 18 miles a day. And
Wow.
I had a couple days where it was, low energy days, but they were great, and we all had them. So
Well, but when we met you, you'd never, ever, ever appeared to be low energy. You were always constant, going forward the whole time, ever up. It was you were great to in terms of you. There was never a problem about you finishing or getting anywhere. Lydnot and I certainly knew that you would definitely be there. So
Well, I honestly can say, getting over that first little hump of saying, okay, I can do this. I can keep up with them. Joanne was a fast hiker, and Andy and I were
right,
more the same, but we were a very compatible group.
yeah,
Um, but once getting over that, I really thoroughly enjoyed being in the woods. People talk
mm,
about the Virginia blues and the Green Tunnel, and to me, I don't need the views. I just would find myself just I felt just very attuned to the world around me. I enjoyed the bird song. I enjoyed all the
I
little
did too.
critters and the snakes and looking for the bears. I love seeing the bears.
I loved the bears, yeah, but I didn't enjoy the snakes at all. They always made me jump. Did you ever question your own ability to be able to complete the hike? Was there ever a time you thought, I'm not sure I can do this?
I never thought I couldn't do it physically. It was my only concern was I wanted to have dedicated partners going through New Hampshire and Maine.
Right.
And if I wasn't able
And
to
as you
do
couldn't got
that,
them, you got me like a not trillion.
it ended up being the perfect group. It really
Of
was.
course, quite right too.
But if I didn't find a dedicated group, I don't know what I would have done, whether I would have continued on my own or not. It would have just crushed me to stop and give it up.
I'm sure.
So
I'm sure.
I don't think I like to think anyway that I would not have done that, but I honestly don't know.
Now, I don't recall precisely where we met, but I know you were still with Joanne and Andy. Do you remember what we did when we met?
I certainly do.
What did we do?
We met you at the side of the road. You had fallen, and you had I think it was your arm that had
Yeah.
a bandage,
Yeah.
and we decided that we needed to go into town and find a beer.
Yeah, you were speaking my language, definitely straight
Yes.
away. I thought, it's going to work.
That was our compatibility test right there, and
Yeah. Yeah, but we didn't get a bit. We got bloody
no,
ice cream, didn't we?
no,
That's what we got.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'll take ice cream anytime. So
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
happy. Yeah, that was interesting. I remember we got a ride into town with
That's right.
some folks in a white van that were picking huckleberries, as they called them, or blueberries.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And we got a lift back to the trail from people. People are so kind, aren't they? They just picked us up and they take us back without any problem at all. I love that part of it. I
Oh
really did.
yeah.
So they had to quit because I think one of them got injured. And what was your mindset like after that? Did you consider quitting at the same time?
No, no,
Oh,
absolutely not. There were a number of things going on, and they each had different physical ailments that were really slowing them down and really taking away the
right.
fun. Joanne was
Yeah.
having some issues with her feet, and Andy, I think, had a couple tick bites that concerned him.
Oh,
And
really? All right.
yeah,
Didn't
so it
know
was
that.
just,
Okay.
I honestly I could see it coming, so I was preparing myself.
Right.
And when they told me, I was like, okay, I can do this.
Good.
I've been through enough of this. I mean, it was in New Jersey where they dropped off,
Right.
so I'd in a lot of experience up to then, and I had been on my own some prior, because we had each gone off the trail a little bit for weddings and such.
Yeah. It does
So
give you confidence, don't you think so? You gain confidence incredibly fast out there. You learn how to do stuff, and I think that is such a valuable lesson. You just by doing it, you learn how to do it. If you know what I mean.
absolutely, at the beginning when I had never backpacked by myself. My training ones had always been with a partner. And, back in Virginia and Pearisburg, that's where they went off for a wedding, and I continued on. It was really good for me. It was to just say, you know, you can do this, and there's no
Yeah.
reason why you can't.
Yeah. That's
So
right. Yeah.
I was, in some ways, I was happy to have had some time on my own
Yeah.
because of that, to prove that you can. And of course, your total freedom to get up when you want and go as far as you want,
Absolutely.
and that
Yeah.
whole thing. But on the other side, I really, my favorite times were when I did have dedicated hiking partners, because
Yeah.
when see things out there,
I agree with you, Pat. I agree with you so much. When you see all these beautiful views, I would have hated to have seen New Hampshire and Maine without you, Ken, and Trillium to say, "Look at that! Isn't that bloody great?"
Yeah,
It was
it's
amazing.
I totally agree with that. That shared experience. I mean, you think back to the bull moose on the trail that we saw.
Yes,
Oh my
yes,
gosh, I love moose. I mean, I would have been thrilled, but to have that memory with three
yeah,
other people of this huge bull moose, meandering in front of us, and the first time we saw Katahdin and knew it was Katahdin,
yes,
and
that's right.
Franconia Ridge. I mean, those are just amazing things. Flying a kite up on Moosalak. I mean, it was just
That's awesome. Absolutely
it would
awesome.
have been fun by yourself, but that shared experience, I think, really does add to it.
Absolutely. And you and I had seen each other a few times on and off, and eventually we met up again at the Hikers Welcome near, I think Glencliff. I think it's called
That's
Glencliff. Yeah.
correct. Yep. Yep.
And you were with Trillium. How did it come about that you were hiking with Trillium?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. We had met Trillium when I was with Wilderness Hawk and Cinnamon Girl way back around Hot Springs because we stayed together at the Elmer's Sunnybank Inn,
Oh yeah, remember it. Lovely.
and she had just
Great vegetarian food.
yeah, oh my gosh, that was amazing.
Yes,
Really
awesome.
good. And she had just come back kind of on the trail from she had hurt her knee, so she was off 2 or 3 weeks. So we had crossed paths for a day or 2 and then stayed there, and then we had moved on, and I hadn't we had, I guess, exchanged some information at that point, but
Right.
I didn't see her until New Hampshire. We had been in touch, trying to both of us were looking for somebody to hike the rest of the way
Right.
with,
Right.
and, we had met each other back then and thought, we'd be a compatible group. So
Yeah.
so she, was off the trail again, that she had some sort of I can't remember the kind of dancing she did. She had some sort of event down in Pennsylvania, and
Oh,
then I believe,
oh,
and then
what's yes. Oh, I do
yeah,
remember it. Yes, yeah.
and then
It's
she
kind
was
of
coming
yes,
back on the trail, so she was willing to kind of skip a little bit to jump to where, we all ended up being, and
yeah.
then we were gonna go forward for those last 2 states together.
Yeah, because Lydenite and I, we talked about this. We said, if we slack pack, we can need two other people. We wanted to slack pack all the way to Katahdin from New Hampshire, which was perhaps a bit excessive. And we found some guy who might, no, we didn't find him. Trillium suggested him actually, who we said, if we pay some guy a certain amount of money, we get 4 of us, he'll take our pack sometime. That'd be great. And so we put it to you guys, and you thought it was a good idea. And so the next morning we were slack packing up Moosalaki, weren't we? Going from north to south.
Yeah, yeah, I think we kind of met I think it was after Musalak that the grand scheme was launched, and it
Oh,
was
that's right. When we came down, you're right, absolutely right. But we saw you up there. Obviously, you were there.
correct. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, how do you think the dynamics of your hike changed after we went off as a team? Do you think it changed how you hiked, or did you have to make compromises you didn't otherwise have to make before?
Well, honestly, I'll tell you that the biggest change that made when the 4 of us got together was I moved my first aid kit from the bottom of my pack to the top. Because man, you had some spectacular falls. Remember
I did.
your
Yes.
phone in Maine? That's
Oh,
amazing that
totally.
still
Yeah.
worked. They're not supposed to bend that way.
It still worked though, didn't it? It still took pictures and everything. It was amazing.
But,
Oh dear.
seriously, I think, I had been in a group before, and I think we operated largely the same, where we would
Yeah.
come together and say, "Okay, this is the distance we're trying to cover today, and this is where we,"
Yeah.
joint decisions. So I don't think anything changed too much. I mean, the big thing is, boy, that comfort level goes up a little because, now you've got dedicated partners, and it takes kind
Totally.
of some of the worry, especially going through New Hampshire and Maine, away, that you've got some people that are
Yeah.
looking out for you.
I didn't know it was going to be as difficult as it was, but I'm really glad we did meet up because it is really difficult. There's no question about it. And if one of us had fallen badly somewhere alone, it could have been really nasty. So
Absolutely.
I was totally glad we did.
One quick validation of how hard it is. One of my sons, just spent a few days hiking. They did Mount Washington and some of the other mountains right there, the Presidential Range, and he hikes a lot in the Adirondacks. He's not a
Yeah.
backpacker, so this was his first backpacking experience. But when he came back, he said, "New Hampshire was hard." This is a 30-year-old, who's done
Oh,
in
yeah.
pretty good shape, and I'm thinking, yeah. It is hard.
Yeah.
With more, well, maybe he did have more weight than we had. He carried a lot, but
But we eventually got there, and we got to Baxter. And do you remember that last evening in Baxter? I think Lydnott had gone into town with his wife and his mother, and we were Trillium and John, her boyfriend, had allowed us to camp right in front of their hut, hadn't they? But
they allowed us, but
we
certain other parties didn't.
What was that about? They made us move. I couldn't believe they made us move. I was pissed, I tell you. I tried to get very English on him, but it was going nowhere at all. We had to move about 20 yards and pay him more money as well. That was
I don't think through hikers are their favorite at Baxter, for sure.
I think you're right. But we were so excited the following morning. Do you remember that?
Oh gosh,
Trillium
yes.
had gone ahead with her boyfriend, and the three of us set out together. What do you remember of the climb?
I remember just feeling super excited. Now, for me, it wasn't the end of my hike. I did have to go back and do Shenandoah, but it felt like the end. It felt, this. You've been striving to get here for months, literally months. You've been seeing it for a couple weeks, and it's looming there ahead of you. And you've seen pictures of people at the sign, and it definitely, I think we bounded up the part of it anyway. It was a tough climb. I remember one part where it was kind of a sheer rock, and I don't know. You guys had to boost me up. I don't know if you remember that.
It was tough, yeah.
But it was. The adrenaline rush was certainly going, and it was exciting times. And
what was that moment like when you touched the sign? What did you feel? Was it relief, thanks, excitement? I mean, what was it?
It was definitely, I wouldn't say relief. It was a really nice sense of accomplishment that, I'm a goal-oriented person. And I think part of the draw of the AT, other than, the nature and there's a physical challenge, a mental challenge.
Sure.
But there's also, it's 2,185.3 miles, at least the year we went. And that's a challenge, it's a goal to get there. And I felt like, really accomplished that goal.
Yeah,
and just the memories that were packed into that last, 5 months at that time.
Yeah.
And the people you met and the things you've seen. And it's just, it was, I wouldn't say overwhelming, but it was close to overwhelming. It was
overwhelming
a really
for
good
me.
feeling.
It was totally overwhelming for me. And I always said I'd never do it again. But you, me, and Lydnott met again on the John Muir Trail in 2016 when you worked out this plan for us. And unfortunately, I had to wimp out for 3 days. Do you recall what I said to you when I left you all?
Absolutely. You said that we would always have Katahdin.
You know what? I'm not very good for improvised speeches, but that was about the best line I've ever done when I'm saying goodbye to anybody. I was so upset when I left you guys. I got very, very tearful, and I didn't know. I then headed home, and I didn't know for a couple of days. I got a phone call just as I was just being driven home. You didn't go much further than me, did you?
Not a single step, really. No, unfortunately. My husband, as you know, had a little accident that evening that got us to the emergency room and immediately off the trail.
There was no going back, was there? There was no going back.
No, there was no way. It was so unfortunate for on so many levels. But of course, Ken, who had trained, and I still feel like I abandoned him on that one. But there's nothing I could do, and he certainly understood.
Yeah,
but it was a sad, but we're just thankful. It could have been way worse. And Joe,
he's okay now, though, isn't he?
Absolutely. He's got one little tiny scar on his nose, but the rest you really can't tell.
It's going to be a great story. It's going to be a great story for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I don't think I'll get him back, though. I think if I were to do the John Muir, which I still would like to, I don't think he wants to go back and do it, and I respect that.
But I failed at it twice. And I tell you what, I just cannot take that elevation. So I don't think I'll be doing it again. Now, many people come on this show and they talk about the AT as a transformative experience. Did you find it was transformative for you, or because you're quite and I hesitate to use the word, but you're quite a solid individual. You're very consistent, very level-headed, and so on. Did you find it transformative in your life, or did you just carry straight back on with your regular life?
I wouldn't say that it was transformative. I mean, there were definitely takeaways from the trail, and it continues to affect, my life and the whole backpacking and wanting to do additional trails. It's going to
Sure.
become a part of, it has become a part and will continue to be a part of Joe and my future. There's trails we want to do together. He
Cool.
will be on sabbatical next year, and we're hoping to get to the Grand Canyon. And I've slowly been getting him back to each of the 14 states of the AT. So
Right.
we would like to next September be up in Maine. But I think other than
Well, I might be there then.
I know that would be so cool.
That'd be
We'll
cool.
be
That would be
following
so
you
cool to
and
meet you
track
guys.
you down if we're there together.
Definitely,
But
definitely.
I think the biggest takeaway, and I wouldn't call it transformative, but reaffirming. And it's not that I question how good people were, but there's just goodness abounds on that trail. The goodness of
Totally.
people, from the hikers to the trail magic to the trail maintainers. So many people do so many things
Yes.
for no reward other than how they feel, I
To make
guess.
us have a better day,
Yeah,
make
yeah.
hikers have a better. I mean, what sort of person does that? It's amazing to me every time I see them. And when I saw a trail maintainers, I would make a point of. It's almost like you say to the military, "Thank you for your service." I'd make a point of thanking them. It's an amazing thing that they do. They get out there to make our day better. How cool is that?
Yeah, and boy, the intricacy of some of the work that they do, the various steps that
Yes.
they're building
Oh yeah.
in a
Yeah.
very remote area with limited equipment, it's amazing. And like I said,
Still didn't stop me falling over though, did it?
unfortunately, no.
Oh dear. Well, look, it's been an absolute joy to catch up with you again, Pat. And I really hope I do meet you and Joe sometime in September next year. That will be a complete icing on the cake for me to meet you guys again. And it'd be great to go up Katahdin with you again. That'd be
Oh my
really
gosh!
cool
Oh my,
if we
that
could do
would
that.
be that would be. Then,
Yeah.
then we can say we've always had
We've always had
Katahdin twice. Yeah.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Well, but thanks for spending the time. I really, really, really appreciate it. All right.
Well, thank you. Great catching up.
And you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Pat was such a good friend to have on the trail. She was never moody. She always had a kind word to say and would help anybody. Even better than that, she was the greatest organiser. When Ken and I suggested slackpacking to Pat, and to Trillium to be fair, the girls, but particularly Pat, would organise us so that all Ken and I had to do was to show up. We're really good at that. Pat always referred to slackpacking opportunities, an expression that always made Ken and me chuckle a lot. Pat would be poring over the guidebook and be working out where those slackpacking opportunities would next arrive. Funnily enough, we once spent 4 straight days being slackpacked, and on that 5th night we were all much happier to be back in the woods. There is only so much joy you can get from burgers and beers, but a night in the woods, listening to the nuthatches tweeting away, puts everything else in its place. And do you know what? I'm so glad that Pat remembered my "we'll always have Katahdin" line as I had to say goodbye to them on the John Muir Trail. That wasn't rehearsed, by the way. And I know we mentioned Trillium's dancing. I'm pretty sure now that it was called contra dancing. Hope I'm right. Now, 3 very different conversations from the outdoor retailers market in July. First up, I spoke with the deliciously French accented Patrick Gauguillon of Paraquito. Patrick had an interesting product to introduce, and we spoke quite early on. By the way, there's some static that seems to come into some of these interviews, and I was unable to clear much of it. It doesn't really affect the sound too much, though. Here's Patrick telling us all about Paraquito. Right, I'd like to introduce Patrick Gauguillon of Paraquito USA Corp. Patrick has a very strong smelling mosquito repellent. Tell me how this works.
Hello, Steve.
Hi.
Very nice meeting you.
And you.
So basically, Paraquito started 11 years ago in Europe.
Okay.
And the whole story behind it's a product which is made with natural essential oils. So no DEET, no chemical, no alcohol.
And people love that.
And people love that.
Yeah.
So started in, as I said, in France and Germany, UK, Spain, Italy, etc. Then grew to Asia. And Japan, China,
Sure.
Hong Kong, etc.,
Sure.
Australia. And then during one of my trips to Europe, I saw this product, and I have been always very attracted to, one, natural products. Secondly, I'm a mosquito magnet myself, so I had a personal vested interest in that one.
Is it true that some people are and some people really aren't?
Yeah, it's very true.
that amazing?
The 80-20% rule works. So 20% of the people get 80% of the bites.
All right.
And that's scientifically proven. So we saw that, and then we brought it to the US.
All right.
So
how
the
does it work?
essential oils come from France, and we assemble the product in Fort Lauderdale in Florida.
And this is audio, obviously, but
Yeah.
I will take a picture later. So tell us what
So
you
let
do.
me explain to you the concept,
Sure.
and I'll try to,
Sure.
so people can imagine how it works. So basically you have two different kind of concepts. You have one which is about refillable wristband and clips, and one which is a roll-on you put on your skin.
Right,
So two
okay.
different things. So if you think about a wristband, think about a wristband you will wear around your wrist.
Sure.
You insert a pellet,
Yeah.
which contains 7 natural essential oils, and then the diffusion process starts. You have a 7-foot protection. It diffuses around you. So
All right,
it creates
right.
like a kind of a shield.
Yeah.
Okay. It lasts for 2 to 2 weeks, and it's waterproof. So you put you have your wristband. You go into the water.
So the
you
pellet-
put it on your kids.
So
you
the
don't have to
pellet
think
just
about it.
dissolves, does it?
It doesn't dissolve. It's a patented process,
Okay.
but basically it diffuses. As soon as it's in contact with the air,
All right.
it diffuses.
All right, okay.
And that's how it works.
Right, okay.
So yeah, you think about the kids. It's not easy to apply products on them several times a day, whatever.
yeah.
You put the wristband around them. They go into the water. Outside of the water, they're all good. They're all protected.
Right.
So you have the clip as well, which works the same way, which you put on a stroller. So because you don't want anything close to
Sure.
your baby,
Yeah.
you can put that on your backpack as well, on your belt, and it works the same way. So it creates a shield around you, which protects you from mosquitoes.
So how have you tested this? How have you tested the effectiveness of this?
Okay, so our products basically has been tested and is tested constantly in labs in Europe.
Sure.
We test it here as well. There's science behind that. Cage test. You put your arms in a cage. You see measures.
Nice.
Not always, but you measure the landing of mosquitoes. How many you get? Concentration of mosquitoes. There's real science behind that.
People volunteer for that?
Yes,
Stick
they
your hand
do.
in the cage,
They
yeah,
do.
happy
They
days.
do. They do.
Now, you mentioned the other thing, which was the...
So the other thing is a roll-on.
Yeah.
So that's for really infested area.
You're right.
So you think about, I can see you're based in Florida.
Yep.
Think Florida, 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. when you have the cloud of mosquito coming on you. What you do is basically, you use a roll-on as a roll-on. You put it on your skins. So 6 stripes on your body, 1 on each arm, 1 on each leg, 1 on each side of your neck, and you are protected for up to 5 hours.
And is that the same stuff?
So it's all natural, same
Yeah.
thing. So you have citronella, rosemary, geranium, mint, peppermint, clove. It's the same thing, no chemical, no DEET, no alcohol, and you're good to go.
And where do you see this company going? Where do you see this sort of business expanding?
So basically, we like good for you products. So there are obviously other things we can work on. Right now, we are focused on mosquitoes.
Right.
There are a lot of bugs around, so
Yeah.
you can imagine about other bugs we could work on in the future, and you can imagine other applications as well in terms of this product itself.
And is there do you have an applicator or any possible application to clothing? Because some people actually deal with their clothing before they go on trips, and they make permethrin, I think they use, which is probably quite a strong sort of.
Yeah,
drug, I guess.
we could, but being in the natural world today, we have created these products which the wristband or the clips, they don't touch your skin. So
Course,
already
yeah.
you're there.
Of course, yeah.
And then for infested area, we think the roll-on is very practical. You can think about other applications as well. We are not in the closing yet, but that's something we definitely have on our map.
But I would say, by the way, that this is in loads of different colours, and it looks really nice. So I think it's a really nice thing. So I appreciate you taking time to talk to us.
Thank you, Steve. And if you want to learn more about it, just go to parakito.com, parakito.com, and you will see basically you will have all the technical elements I
Sure.
mentioned, plus all the designs available.
And how can people get it?
So people can get it in many stores. You think about Aria, you think about Target, you think about Whole Foods. So a lot of stores, and online, parakito.com, Amazon, widely
And
available.
how much was one of these wristbands with?
So it retails just below $20.
Okay.
Okay, and you have a month's protection out of them because there are 2 refills in the pack.
All right. And how much does the refill cost?
The refills themselves, once you have your band or your new clip, they cost $13 for 2. So you're looking at 40 cents a day for a consumer.
Okay, cool. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you very much. Very nice meeting you.
And you. Patrick very kindly gave me a wristband that I'm going to try out when I go to Spain. I'll let you know how it works. Next up, we've got Monty Griffith, a terrific bloke from Bridgeford Foods. I've been avoiding food companies for much of the time, mainly because of my relationship with Trailtopia, but I couldn't resist taking a taste when I was offered it. Let's face it, what man would walk past free food? Anyway, Monty and I started chatting and I ended up recording him. Here's Monty. Right, I'm here with Monty Griffith of Bridgeford Foods Corporation. And you've got an interesting line of foods related in some way to improving the food our military eats.
Yes.
So tell us about that in terms of hiking on the trail.
So these our military personnel are used to eating MREs or rations,
Yeah.
and they're very good for being in the outdoors.
Sure.
So what we've done is taken our military rations that we make for the various militaries and are now presenting them commercially in retail. So you can buy these and use these in any type of outdoor activity because these are tear open the package and eat. There is no prep required in our product. So we have
It's a lazy man's way of eating.
Any man can do it. No. So what we do is we no refrigeration, good for 3 years shelf life. They're all made with real meat, all USDA pork, beef, or chicken. And we also have fruit filled, pastry filled, and we have a wrap item. And in the wrap items, we have a barbecue pork, a sweet pork, and we have a nice southwestern flavored beef and cheddar cheese.
I'm looking at it. There's it says nine great
Yes.
tasting flavour choices. So it goes from breakfast, including French toast and a cinnamon bun. And the French toast is beautiful, by the way.
Yes.
I didn't taste the cinnamon bun. But there's pepperoni pizza with cheese and sauce, beef with barbecue sauce.
Yes.
Tons of different things which will take you through the day.
Right.
And so the package is presented as 2 packs in a pack, is it?
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
And you can take those out and eat those up to 3 years after they're packed.
Yes, as long as you store them at 80 degrees Fahrenheit or less.
Okay.
If you store them hotter than that, the shelf life will diminish some.
Right.
Okay. There's the variety is there because the service people who are using the rations need variety.
Yeah.
So as you just ate yourself, there's a sweet and
Sure.
sour chicken.
Sure.
The pepperoni pizza was in big demand, and that just came out this year, and that's doing very, very well.
And the pricing you told me sounded pretty darn reasonable.
I think you can get them, Rick, if I'm not mistaken, anywhere from $6 to $7 would be.
And that's 2 meals, though. That's the point.
Yes, 2 packages.
It's 2 packages, which is 2 meals. Comes in a larger package and 2 small packages are within that larger
Right.
package. What about if you're hiking on a hot day?
So on a hot day, if you wanted to warm up the package, that you could use that heat in your favor to warm it up. They are designed to be eaten cold.
Yeah.
The shelf life will be just fine on a hot day. Once you open the item, though, out of the foil pouch, you should consume it within an hour or 2.
Right, okay.
Okay, but if you wanted to store it for 5 or 6 days while you're hiking, it's not a problem at all.
Sure.
Because they're shelf stable.
And what's the plan going forward? Are you going to introduce more
variety.
More variety, yeah.
More, like we said, we've got the tortilla flour-filled wraps.
Right.
So that's an option if you don't want the bread-filled. The bread-filled ones for your radio listeners are more look like a Hot Pocket with like a Sloppy Joe mixture in it.
Right.
But unlike a Hot Pocket, they don't have to be frozen. These are shelf-stable, no refrigeration.
So you literally could feed yourself with no stove, good tasting food all the time. I've had 2 of them and they all tasted good so far. So I like that part of it.
That's great.
What did I have? I had sweet and sour chicken. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, sweet.
You directed that me to that straight away. Yeah.
I like that, and I like this southwestern flavored beef and cheddar wrap.
Okay. Cool.
Very good.
So where can people get them from then?
They can get them at Cabela Sporting Goods stores.
Yep.
So they can get them at Sportsman's Warehouse.
Okay.
And they can get them at Academy Sports.
Yep.
And of course, you can Google Bridgeford Shelf Stable Sandwiches on Google and find an internet retailer for them.
Bridgeford Shelf Stable
Bridgeford Shelf Stable Sandwiches.
Okay, cool.
Bridgeford's known for its frozen bread dough and its jerky snack items.
Okay, cool. Appreciate it. Thanks very much for your time.
Yes, thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
It really was tasty and a good alternative if you're somebody who's prepared to go without a stove. Last, but one of the biggest personalities I met at the show, I spoke with Justine Baron of Giro. She has a neat platform to help people wishing to rent gear. Whether or not renting gear is a viable through-hike solution is another question, yet her idea seemed perfect for people wishing to find out if they'd even like hiking and backpacking, indeed many outdoor pursuits. You might want to check out her site. Here's Justine. Right, I'm here with Justine Baron, is that correct?
Yes.
Cool. We're not quite decided on the name yet, but apparently it's going to be Giro eventually, but it currently may be outdoorgiro.com. So tell us about that, Justine.
Yeah, the name is Giro, but we don't have Giro.com.
Okay.
So we are at outdoorgiro.com right now.
Okay. Now tell us the concept. It's a great idea and something which I hadn't even considered. So I like the idea of that.
Thanks. It's like the outdoor gear kayak, or hotels.com or Orbit. So we're aggregating all of these merchants and brands into one platform
Sure.
with automated bookings. So if you ever need to rent a tent or a hiking backpack or whatever that looks like. Instead of Googling hiking backpack rental and finding, 10 to 15 vendors, you're able to see all of your options in one place and click the dates and the time you want to book it and do it automatically online.
Now, I saw you at the Pitch Fest the other day, and you were talking about this platform, and you were saying that the mum and pup sort of stores use spreadsheets to do their gear, and this is for them to make it more efficient, I presume.
Absolutely, yeah, and actually a good amount of them aren't even as advanced as doing spreadsheets. Yep, a lot of them are still on pen and paper.
All right, cool.
So there's definitely a huge value proposition for them to use Giro by being able to run all their transactions through the booking platform aspect and be able to manage their inventory, all of their rental reservations on a calendar, and see like intuitive reports where they can see like the top products and anything that's like, not selling, so they don't order it again in the future.
So how did you come up with the idea?
Well, originally I wanted to make gear more accessible to everyone. And I started this marketplace app for peer-to-peer rentals.
Okay.
Like a sharing economy, like Airbnb style app. And through that, we partnered with several vendors. And they were basically asking, can we use your platform for all our transactions? Or can we just use your platform to get more exposure? And so I realized after seeing a bunch of them who were like doing everything on pen and paper, that was like the opportunity we really wanted to focus on. So we cut out the peer aspect and redesigned the platform to make it a little more intuitive and sophisticated for these merchants.
You're a local organization, so how do you scale this to make it countrywide?
Yeah, we're actually working on scaling. Today we brought on our first official CTO now.
Who is standing here as we speak and laughing.
Hi. And together we decided that we're going to actually try to scale with Venezuelan resources. So
interesting.
Becky has connections to some resources that basically are incredibly low priced, and they can help us onboard shops when they're too busy to do it, and they can also help with getting more shops on the platform.
So where will you take it next? Where are you looking to get across the country?
So we're servicing Colorado, but we do have other regions already on board.
All right, good.
We've got a few vendors in New York and the East Coast and Florida. We're not being exclusive to any region, but we're focusing now on Colorado, West Coast, and then we'll probably focus on the South.
Okay, so even for those people who don't live around here and they want to look at what you have, where do they go and find you?
OutdoorGiro.com.
Or maybe Giro.com one day.
Hopefully Giro. Mark Giro, if you're listening to this and you want to sell me your domain, please do.
Oh, that's his name, Giro. Oh, God, bad luck.
Yeah, it is. It's unfortunate, but I'm going to try and figure something out to get it.
I'm sure. Okay.
Yeah,
So if people want to reach out to you and they want to learn more about this, can they contact you directly?
Sure, yeah, I'd love that. My email's jb, as in boy, at outdoorgiro.com.
Outdoorgiro.com. Okay, cool. Appreciate it.
Don't send me solicitations. Thanks.
I might edit that out. We'll see how it goes. But thanks very much indeed for talking to us. I appreciate it.
Of course.
She's a go-getter, no doubt, and I think her idea makes a lot of sense. You can check out all these companies with links in the show notes. I've got somebody else to introduce you to in a moment, but first I've got a couple of 5-star reviews to read. Ben Bedley says he is planning a flip-flop. Call it an oboe. He's planning a flip-flop after he graduates in May. He goes on to say, I recommend this show for people who are not yet hikers. I say not yet because after listening to this show, you're going to want to get out on a trail. That's what we're hoping for, Ben Bedley. So I'm glad it's had that effect on you. Good luck with your oboe. Sridhar Sharaf congratulates us for the 100th show and goes on to say, in a similar vein as Ben, he says, you and your guests are doing an awesome job of inspiring thousands of people to get outdoors. You've certainly inspired me to do a long hike one day. If I ever do, or attempt to do a through hike, all credit goes to you and your guests. Thanks, Sridhar. Do you know what? Getting comments like that and the many lovely emails I get from you all is what keeps me going on this. I'm sure that all my guests will be delighted to know that we've inspired people from all ages, shapes and sizes to get off their backsides and into the woods. I really can't think of a better thing to hear. So now it's Dan Wowak. Dan was somebody else I met in Denver, but I saw in him the potential for a really good segment about techniques that could help anybody on a trail. He's clear, articulate and enthusiastic about his craft. This week, Dan is going to talk us through building a fire. Okay, I'd like to introduce Dan Wowak of Cold Cracker Bushcraft. It took me a long time to actually say that. Hi, Dan, how are you?
Good. How are you, Steve?
I'm good. And you're one of the standouts for me of the Outdoor Retailer show. We bumped into each other and you were telling me that you were going to do a demo of how to start a fire, which I thought was a pretty brave thing for somebody to do in the middle of a
right
in the middle of
the whole demo.
Yeah, and the demo. And so I wandered by when it was on, and I thought it'd be really helpful for people here who listen to the show who go out into the woods, want to start a fire. If you talk them through, about starting a fire. So the first thing I want to talk about is how do you find a place to build a fire? What are the various things that you need to consider?
Right. Well, before we even get to building a fire, I mean, there's a lot of people right away, especially hikers. I know you hike, jump to the conclusion of, well, when am I ever going to need a fire? I'm probably not going to need that. But from a survivalist standpoint, teaching survival skills, we can look at if you take away some of the tools that hikers might have, stoves, sleeping bags, or they get in an emergency situation, not only does it keep you warm, but it allows you to boil your water, cook food that you might have. So there's a whole plethora of different things that we need in order to keep ourselves alive in that emergency scenario, or just have a fire for comfort. So when we go out and we're in the backcountry or in the woods and we're going to set up a fire, we want to look for a bunch of different things, because a campfire is really like the center of our home out in the woods. So when we first decide, hey, we're going to set up a campfire, it's super important that we look at what's around us. So just the environment itself. Is it super dry? Should we maybe not start a fire there if the wind's going to pick up? So we want to just look what's around us and get an idea of the environment. So are we in a real dry environment, wet environment, what's happening? And then once we look at that and just intake that information, we really want to break it down into I call it the 4 W's. And so there's a lot of others in the survival industry. So the first of the W's is wind. We want to look at what the wind direction is and where the wind's blowing, because if it's a very cold day, we don't want to be out that we're very exposed. So we want to try to nestle ourselves away somewhere, and that's going to help protect our fire also. We want to look for water. So we don't want to be in a low area that if it starts to rain or the snow starts to melt, or as the fire builds up in a snowy environment, we don't have water going into our fire lay. So that's important also. And then we also want to just look around in general. Is there enough wood to sustain that fire? So are we in an area of hardwoods that there's not much downed tinder, which is just very small pieces of wood that we need to get that fire going? Or are we in a pine forest that there's a ton of material that we can use? And then the last thing is that's a little bit outside of the fire making is widow makers. So dead branches up above us that can fall down and hurt us, or widow makers in the sense that there's dead trees that we can break down to help fuel that fire with fuel.
I was wondering what that fourth W was, by the way.
Yep.
Yeah, so you've worked out all these things, okay?
Yep.
And so are you saying you can start a fire in wet? You can't start a fire in the rain, can you, I presume?
Oh, yeah, you can. There's different techniques. Really, fire is broken down into 3 elements: heat, oxygen, and fuel. And we call that the triangle of fire. Right. And if you understand that, once you understand that, they're the only 3 things you need to make fire. You just need to understand how to manipulate all the other elements. So how do we manipulate the wood or the fuel in order to make it dry? Even though it's soaking wet out and it's raining, we can cut into that wood and we can expose the dry center. We can pick smaller pieces of wood. We can get more heat initially to dry that wood out quicker. So almost any condition, it's possible to make a fire. You just need to know how to manipulate that triangle of fire.
So that's heat, oxygen, and fuel. Okay.
Yes.
That's the triangle. Yeah, I remember the triangle when you were doing it.
Yeah. So I tell people all the time with the triangle of fire, I mean, that's it. There's nothing else to fire. It just, the complexity becomes in when you add in, like you said, rain, snow, wind, subpar materials. That's really what the hardest part is. So once you figure out where you want your campfire, why you want your campfire. Then we're going to start to collect our materials. And that is one of the most important things. And that's the biggest downfall people have, is when they collect the materials to make their fire, they collect the wrong materials. So if we think about a nice big log that we see, we throw on a campfire, or we throw into our wood stove at home, that's not what we want to start our fire. We want very small material. So material is broken down into 3 different categories. So we have tinder, kindling, and fuel. Tinder is the smallest, and that is going to be materials the size of toothpicks. And a lot of times we'll say that and people think, where are you even going to find that? But if you look on the end of branches, if you look under, specifically in pine forest, you can find very thin little branches. So you want to get a lot of that. And when I say a lot, I'm saying 1 or 2 basketball sizes worth of that, because that's going to be the initial, what the flame takes and burns. So we want a lot of that. So we want tinder. Then we're going to, once that tinder is burning, we're going to put fuel. Once the tinder is burning, we're going to put kindling on. And kindling is going to be wood the size of like a pencil. So a number 2 lead pencil, we want sticks that size. We're going to pile a lot of them on. Once they get burning, then we can start to add our fuel. So then we start to add thumb size material, and then we just work our way up. And then we could put those nice big chunks of wood on that we like to do so much around a campfire. But it's really building that base. So tinder is that toothpick size material, kindling, number 2 pencil size, and then fuel is thumb size and up.
Now, when you did the demo, you set it up in a triangle. Funnily enough, I think it was a sort of triangle of a couple of other sticks. What was that about?
So for the demo, you have to always adjust stuff a little bit at demo just to make things work. Ideally, out in the woods, the best method, we all know that the teepee style, we pile up everything. It looks like a nice teepee and we get it started. But really, what I found training people over the years is something called the stack method. And basically what that is once we have our flame ignited, depending on however we decide we're going to ignite that flame, we just stack our material. So we lay it directly on top. And once that stuff starts to burn, so think about that very fine material we talk about, those toothpicks. You lay them right on top of your flame and get them burning. Once they're burning, you lay on those number 2 size pencils. Then you lay on your fuel. And that lets us look at the fire and see what's happening. Is it going out? Is it burning quickly? Is there not enough flame? And then we can dissect that triangle of fire from there. So just stacking the materials has been proven to be most optimal for most people.
So how do people start the fire? You used this metal thing you scraped and flames came out. What are the other ways of starting the fire?
So there's a ton of different methods out there, and there's a ton of different products out there. The go-to should always be some type of open flame source. So a weatherproof, stormproof match, a butane lighter, just a basic Bic lighter, anything that you can have immediate flame. You just got to shepherd that flame into something more. That's going to be your best bet. From there, though, you can go into something like that metal stick I was using that we call a ferrocerium rod. If you scrape that, it throws
I couldn't remember the name of that. I couldn't remember. Yeah, ferrocerium rod. Okay.
Yeah, ferrocerium rod, or we all say a ferro rod. You scrape that with a sharp edge, and it throws a high intensity spark down. It'll ignite whatever material you have there. That'll start burning. You can use that, and then you can even go more traditional. So flint and steel. Think of a real hard piece of steel, like a file. And if you hit it with a certain type of rock, flint specifically, or quartz, it'll throw a low temperature spark. And again, you need some other things to go along with that, but that's really the continuum. So open flame's always going to be your best bet. And then
can I just come back? That ferrocerium rod it really worked. I mean, really worked well, didn't it? It really ignited straight away.
Oh yeah, that is really the go-to in the survival community right now. That is the best device that is out on the market, is the ferrocerium rod. Lighters are good. Like I said, they're your go-to. Matches are your go-to, but you can run out of matches. You can burn up the fuel in your lighter. A Bic lighter will stop working under 32 degrees. So you're going to have to warm that back up. So there's a lot of downfalls that can come with those open flame sources. That ferrocerium rod will work in any weather condition. It can be soaking wet. It can be freezing cold. It'll always throw a hot spark, no matter what the weather condition. So as long as you're skilled enough to use that, you always will have a fire. You just have to understand how to use that appropriately.
Right. Now, you mentioned oxygen. Obviously, that's a really important thing. And I know that when I was on the trail, I saw these young guys putting their face virtually in the fire to blow oxygen into it.
Right.
Because you did it, you were doing it yourself as well, bending down and blowing the oxygen into it. How close do you need to get for that? I mean, because that did look dangerous to me, I tell you.
Well, normally when you're going to add any type of oxygen into a fire, you fell short of being most optimal. So in a sense, if you're blowing oxygen in, either your material is normally too damp or you
Right.
put too large a material on. So you're trying to superheat that fire.
Okay.
So there's companies out there, they make little blowing tubes. They look like big long straws that collapse down, and you can use them, and you could be 2 foot away and it gets
That makes
very
much more sense. Yeah.
yeah, so you could use them. They work really well. But if you are going to just get down, put your face, you want to get low, a foot or two away, just blow some air in and superheat that in order to get that material heated up. But like I said, if you're to that point, you probably fell short with your material selection.
Right.
That it's either too wet or too big.
So your tinder's on and your kindling's on, your pencils are on, your toothpicks and your pencils are on, and it's going well. When did you start adding the bigger pieces?
So anytime you add something larger to a fire is when the flame is above the current fuel level. So if you throw those pencils on, as soon as the flame is burning those pencils and it's above that, so the flame's higher than the pencils, you're good to go. You could throw your next layer on.
And then you got your fire and it stays there.
And that's
amazing.
It, yeah.
So let's say you had your fire. How do you extinguish it? What do you do and how necessary? I mean, what do you advise people to do when they've got a fire? Because of course you should be looking out for it the whole time, especially if you're lighting one in a forest, don't you?
Right.
So how do you keep it safe there? In other words.
So initially, when you build your fire light, you want to try to encapsulate that in something. That's where the traditional stones around the fire, just so it keeps it in, is very, very important. But you want to make sure, again, we look back to that water source. And it's tough sometimes, especially if you're hiking like the Appalachian Trail and you're up on top of a mountain and you decide you're going to make a fire. You might not have a water source close till you get down in one of those valleys. Yeah. So you need to plan a little bit ahead because you're most likely going to have to use a little bit of water. Otherwise, you're going to have to give it ample amount of time to burn itself out. And then you're going to have to just basically stomp on it with your boots once it's out and the embers are just low and just smoking a little bit. Work it out that way if you can't put it out with water. So there are some options. Of course, if you have snow, you can cover it in with snow. Things like that, work really well.
So you just basically take the oxygen away in that case, don't you, effectively?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. No more fuel ahead of time, and then take the oxygen away, and you'll extinguish your heat.
And I've seen a few of these YouTube videos where they say they really take it to the nth degree. I guess you need to restore the ground around the fire, almost as if to try, the leave no trace principles apply there as well. Is that what you do, or is that something that you recommend?
Yeah, I do recommend that. Anytime that we can restore the environment back to what it was like before we were there is great. One thing that I don't think we need to worry about though is that ash and the carbon and stuff that we built up there. The black char. That stuff erodes away very quickly in environment. It's okay for the ground. I mean, it's just adding carbon back into the ground. So if we make sure our fire is totally out, so we're not spreading hot embers, and spread that out. Those fire pits usually you see very quickly, especially even on my school property when we make fires. If we have specific areas we do that very quickly, you see grass and vegetation grow back up through there because that fire has really fueled that ground in order to help with growth.
One thing I noticed, and I know you're going to say this is a terrible thing to do, and I think it is, I noticed that people would throw stuff onto the fire, like cans, and which obviously they shouldn't do, but plastic bottles and stuff like that. I mean, not the thing to do, obviously. Just leave it. The fire is a fire with the things in there burning that should be burning.
I totally agree with that. I think a lot of that just comes down to laziness. Yeah. I mean, if you carry that bottle to the campsite, it probably had liquid in it. There's no reason you can't carry the empty bottle out. So I don't think burning any of that stuff, there's no reason for that at all.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. I mean, I really wanted you to do this. I didn't know whether you could replicate the demo on the podcast, but I think you have. I mean, I've got a vision because I actually saw you doing it anyway. So I loved you going through this, and I really appreciate you doing that. So tell us about one or two of the things you provide at Coal Cracker Bushcraft.
Yeah, so Coal Cracker Bushcraft, we are a wilderness living skills school. We specialize in bushcraft and survival. So when I say that, a lot of people say, well, what's the big difference between bushcraft and survival? Or a lot of people have never even heard the term bushcraft. So I think we all know survival is that life and death scenario. So our basic survival courses cover from hour 1 up to 72 hours. How do we keep ourselves alive? So how do we make fire? How do we build shelter? How do we obtain water? And that's really what that's about. Where bushcraft, on the other hand, is that we're taking more traditional gear. So wool blankets, axes, and we're going out in the woods purposefully to craft things, enjoy ourselves, and have minimal amount of equipment, but use everything from the landscape around us to make our lives more comfortable. So how do we make cook kitchens out there? How do we make tripods? How do we build shelters that are better than just a tarp sitting up? So there's a lot of different things that we do during that class. And then we take all those classes all the way out to long-term wilderness living. So we're teaching how to notch cabin logs, how to butcher game, how to hunt, trap, do all those things you would have to do in this very long-term wilderness living environment.
And people can find out about that by email you, I presume, and going on your website, can't they?
Yeah, so if they go to coalcrackerbushcraft.com, everything's on there. Also YouTube, we have a large YouTube presence. We have about 40,000 subscribers on YouTube right now. I put a video out about 5 days a week.
I'll put a link in the show notes to your YouTube video, I think, and also the website. Because, I think there's a lot of skills out there. I mean, I didn't know how to build a fire. Frankly,
Right.
all the kids were doing it when I was out there. So happy days as far as I'm concerned. But I love the idea of just being able to do it myself. So I'm definitely going to do it when I do the AT next year.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. Well, look, it's been great talking to you. I really appreciate you telling us this. And as I say, you were one of the standouts of the show for me because you were clear and concise, and you've done it again today. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, buddy. Take it easy, all right?
Okay, bye.
Bye. Wasn't that great? I do hope you enjoyed listening to Dan. He's got plenty more to say in the coming weeks, and I hope you stick around to listen to him. He's going to teach us something good every single time. Now, it's time for our book. Here in chapter 11, we're on to day number 10. There's a bit of beeping going on here as Colin, and it is always Colin and never Ellie, as Colin expresses himself rather more liberally than he might. Once more, I had a few outtakes because of giggling on my part. By the way, the lovely Laura had to record part of this at home, in a closet. Don't ask. I'll see you next week. Chapter 11, Day 10, Najera to Santo Domingo. Colin, the secret of life, look after your feet. Often when people ride on the Camino, they wax poetic about Romanesque churches and wheat fields and blue Sierra. But if you want to know about the Camino, talk about feet that throb on the end of your legs like radioisotopes, knees pierced with slivers of steel, neck muscles taut as guitar strings from carrying a 14-kilo backpack, and thighs that burn like phosphorus. The Camino may be a spiritual experience, but before long you will become less obsessed with the divine and far more concerned about your chiropody. A week on the Camino and all anyone wants to talk about is their feet. How can feet ever be important? They're just those odd-looking things on the ends of your legs. But out here, they are much more than that. Your feet are everything. If you have 800 kilometres to walk inside a month, you can't afford to damage them. A stubbed toe can be a calamity if it takes skin off inside your boot. We pilgrims sit around at night in the refugios discussing whether sandals are better than boots, how many pairs of socks to wear while walking, and blister remedies. Should you pop your blisters or leave them be as protection? I have become a foot fetishist. Mates had always said I would. That or rubber. Let me recount the 5 stages of a Camino blister. Number 1. A hot spot appears, an angry red mark somewhere on your feet. It is slightly sore and throbs when you take your boot off. Number 2. A small blister appears. It hurts a bit when you walk. When you take your boot off, everyone tells you to burst it with a sterilised needle. It will feel better. You ignore them. What do they know? Number 3. The next day as you walk, you know what it's like to be subject to the Spanish boot, an instrument of torture used in the Spanish Inquisition, whereby the foot was placed in a steel boot and the boot was tightened by iron screws until it was the size of a toddler's welly. Number 4. The blister bursts inside your boot and turns into a patch of raw flesh the size of a 50-cent piece. When you take off your boot, the skin, flesh and raw nerve endings stick to the woolly parts of your sock and all are removed together. You take off your sock and wring out the pus and blood like a squeegee mop. Everyone asks you why you didn't burst the blister with a pin. Number 5. The next day you find on your foot a suppurating wound the size of a bath mat. You cannot stand on your foot. Even crawling is agony. You still have another month to walk. Everything they once taught me about blisters in first aid was wrong. I now realise there are 2 good reasons to pop your blisters when they appear. 1, because no matter what the medicos say about blisters being nature's natural protection, they hurt, and relieving the pressure is wonderful. They also heal far better that way. You puncture them with a sterile needle, put on some antiseptic and a decent dressing, and you're good to go. Otherwise, they burst in your boot like a punctured water hydrant and spray serum everywhere, and then leave raw pink meat to rub inside your boot all day and turn your feet into hamburger mince. The other good reason to pop them is because it's fun. Last night, Ellie and I spent a happy hour with a needle from her sewing kit that we sterilised with a cigarette lighter and popped each other's blisters. Wow, look at that one go! Yay! Straight up the wall. Whoa, sorry, I got you in the eye. I can even remember where we were the night Ellie showed me the blister she had grown underneath the end of her little toe. It was vast. It had its own pulse and hung there like a tumour. When she popped it, it went off like a fire hose, and it took me and 3 other pilgrims to hold her foot down and direct the spray onto the garden. If only that was the sole problem. Her knee has swollen dangerously. Her leg looks like a cocktail stick with a maraschino cherries stuck halfway down. But it is clear to me that she will not quit on this under any circumstances. And that scares me a little. She might have a better chance if there was an orthopaedic surgeon in her pack, but it's heavy enough as it is. She will have to send home more stuff or she just won't make it. She is totally preoccupied with her body now, not in a vain way, but she's attuned to its workings and takes time to carefully tend to it, like a man nursing an ancient car through the desert. It's humid leaving Nigeria. The morning hums and steams like the tropics. Pine trees crowd in on us in the darkness. We climb a steep ravine that opens onto vineyards and wheat fields. Not yet dawn and my shirt is damp with sweat. Things are strained between Ellie and me. We don't walk together much anymore. I feel like I've exposed too much of myself and now I'm embarrassed and angry at myself. Men are not supposed to show any sign of vulnerability. I feel like a fool. This is not why people love you. You are loved for being tough and for having all the answers and for being able to fix things. The tendinitis in my left foot is slowing me down. Suddenly the skin peels back off my heel. The shock of pain is electric, like I have touched a live wire. My foot buzzes and goes numb. I have no idea what's going on. I keep walking. Whatever has happened, the damage is done now. I don't want to look. As the sun rises, or also rises as we're in Hemingway, Spain, we look out over field after field of wheat. A week ago I stood and gaped. Now I look at the patchwork of grain and vine and think, Jesus Christ, more wheat. This is where they grow the raw produce for Spain's national lunchtime snack, the bocadillo. You see them everywhere, mouldering under glass in every bar, in every back street. Put some cheese in them and it's like chewing an inner soul. Over to the right is what looks and smells like a piggery, where they feed the stringy, tasteless porkers they eventually slaughter, wind cure and piss on before they put them in the dry, tasteless rock-hard bread. Bocadillo con jamon. I hate bocadillos. I find an abandoned chapel by the roadside. All the statuary and religious paraphernalia have been removed. Only the pews remain. I sit down where the altar would once have been and think about the church I went to as a boy. I was christened into the church of Suburbia in Essex. Instead of praying, people gossiped about each other in the churchyard. In Pamplona, I went to a mass but sat on the side facing the congregation instead of the priest. The service was spoken in Spanish but made as much sense to me as it ever did in my own tongue. I watched people at the back yawning and looking at their watches, just as they did in my church, as they do in every church I've ever been in. But the alternative to organised religion is to search for the divine yourself, following signposts where you find them, and with no guarantees of heaven at the end of it. And that's pretty scary. But I have the growing conviction that to be a better man there has to be some sort of spiritual connection made. Goodness is not the consequence of a litany of prayers learned by rote. Perhaps this is what pilgrimage is all about. That and learning to look after your feet.
Ellie. Freddy Krueger's face. By the end of the day, my knee has doubled in size, and Cole's blisters, or what is left of them, are hideous. The back of his heel is a raw mess of weeping flesh that looks intriguingly similar to Freddy Krueger's face. It's horrible to look at, yet impossible to look away. He's being brave and says he's happy to keep patching them up, but rather aptly, it's his Achilles heel letting him down. The injuries, along with our conversation in Logrono, have me wondering whether we'd have been better walking through without stopping to rest. It seems to have done more harm than good. Then again, without the day's break, our pilgrimage might well have ended by now. I think about Cole's words in Logrono each day. I ask if he's okay, but he's more determined than ever now that he's just fine. I drop it and keep my thoughts to myself. Is this what happens when we don't face fear? Eventually it catches up, and typically it's when we are least prepared and least expect it. We arrive in Santo Domingo.
Colin, my Achilles heel. When we get to the albergue, which is inside a convent in Santo Domingo, I go into the boot room and sit down on the stairs. When I take off my sock, a large part of my foot comes away with it, like when you peel really old wallpaper off a wall and some of the plaster and brick sticks to it. I stare fascinated at my sock and the stuff that is still attached. There's some skin, there's some meat, a bit of blister plaster, a major blood vessel, all in a sort of soft pink hamburger lump. At least the tendinitis is going to be better, because the bit of tendon that was troubling me is there as well, I think. Now there's less of it to strain. What is left is a piece of bright pink raw flesh the size of a beach flag. That's got to hurt, Canada says, but it actually doesn't. It's too numb to hurt. It's a great anatomy lesson. Like the song says, the ankle bone really is connected to the foot bone, and what's left is still connected to my sock.
Ellie, Santo Domingo, Catholic cocks and one crowing nun. Santo Domingo de la Calzada is a town best known for having chickens in the church. This odd attribute pretty much sets the tone of the place. Walking the grey-framed medieval streets reminds me of a family holiday in the US when my father took a wrong turn on the way back to our hotel in San Francisco and walked us through a dodgy part of town. The air was thick. I'd never felt anything like it. I was 7 and my family were the only white people in a busy street. We'd just come from evening mass and tentatively edged along the footpath, dodging the glares, my father's vice-like grip crushing my tiny hand. When we returned, the hotel manager was visibly distraught when told of our detour and couldn't believe we'd made it out alive. There are no ghetto blasters or street gangs in Santo Domingo, but there's certainly an uncomfortable air about the place. Maybe it's the high stone walls, the empty streets, or endless shades of grey. Maybe it's the fact that we have arrived in the middle of siesta. Or maybe it's the chickens. Santo Domingo de la Calzada was named after the town's patron saint, Dominic, a hermit who lived in a forest nearby. After a vision, he decided to dedicate his life to pilgrims on their way to Santiago. His first accomplishment was to single-handedly carve a pathway through the dense forest for pilgrims to pass. The very pathway we have just entered along. Santo Domingo de la Calzada in English roughly translates as Saint Dominic of the Road. Following this feat, he went on to build a bridge over the Rio Oja, along with a pilgrim's hospital. In time, the township grew around the hospital, providing complimentary services, and as such, is said to be the world's first purpose-built tourist town. Domingo was later canonised for his efforts. But about the chickens. The veracity of the story, as with all great fables, is debatable. But let's go with what we know. Around the 14th or 15th century, a man and his wife, who may or may not have been from Germany, decided to make a pilgrimage to Santiago, taking their teenage son, who may or may not have been called Huguenot, along with them. They stopped overnight here at the inn. Now the innkeeper's daughter, as in all good limericks, fell madly in lust with the strapping young Huguenot, who was quite generously endowed by all accounts. Well hung, in today's parlance. But Huguenot was a good Christian lad on a pilgrimage, so he refused her advances, believing she would understand. He may have known how to be good, but he obviously did not know much about women. By way of retribution, the young lass hid a silver goblet in Huguenot's sack as he slept, and next morning told her father she had seen him steal it. Dragged before the courts, Huguenot was well hung again, this time for good. Huguenot's parents left their son's body to rot on the gallows, as all good Christian parents would, while they continued their pilgrimage to Santiago. Upon arrival at the Compostela, they prayed to St. James for their son. Amazingly, when they returned to Santo Domingo, the resurrected Huguenot was waiting to meet them. The town's governor, who had himself condemned the boy to death, was enjoying a lunch of roast chicken when he told of the miracle. "Impossible," he scoffed. "That boy is as alive as the 2 birds on this plate." With that, his dinner, a cock and a hen, jumped off his plate and began to crow. The town soon became famous for its clucky miracle, and to commemorate the event, or to attract more pilgrims, which some cynics have suggested might have been the reason behind this improbable story all along, a polychrome henhouse was erected above the entrance to the cathedral and a pair of live birds placed inside. The custom continues today, although I assume with a different pair of chooks. It's a strange sight in a cathedral. It's also possibly the most interest I've shown in a church since visiting Notre Dame. Medieval marketing at its best. Ellie. Something afoot in Chicken Town. It started with a boot, a very big boot. Dan is a Canadian guy, Canada, who looks remarkably like Clark Kent. A tall, gentle giant with a backpack the size of my couch. Neatly cropped black hair, chiseled jawline, striking cheekbones, and glasses to boot. Dan's a high school teacher, and his nature suggests he's the kind of teacher his students remember. There's always one from your younger years, one who managed to reach through all of the angst and uncertainty to touch the part of you that actually cared. It's only after taking his pack off at the end of the day that Dan realises he's missing a boot. After a particularly humid morning, he had tied them by the laces to the outside of his pack to allow them to dry while he walked. As soon as he notices, he quickly rounds up 3 local boys and offers them a handful of loose change if they head out on bikes along the trail and retrieve it. An hour later, the kids return empty-handed. Sitting on a patch of grass in the town square, nursing his left boot, Dan tells me about an article he read before he came away. Written by a man who'd walked the Camino several years before, it told the story of how the man arrived in Spain with a backpack full of belongings. It was too big. Realising that his possessions served little purpose out here, he began to give random items away. A t-shirt in one town, a pair of shorts in another, a camera, a smaller bag, and so on. By the time he reached Santiago, all he had left were the clothes on his back and his pilgrim stick. Standing outside the cathedral, taking a moment to enjoy his achievement, a beggar boy came up to him and asked him for his stick. When he refused to hand it over, the boy began to tug at the end, and soon the two were embroiled in a bitter struggle for it. "No, it's all I have," the man insisted. His stick now represented the total sum of his external possessions. As the two engaged in their tug of war, the man suddenly realised what his life had come to. He had completed the pilgrimage, a spiritual journey of humility, reverence and honour, and yet there he was, fighting with a poor child over a stick. Dan came to Spain with 22 kilograms on his backpack, twice what he needed and twice what he now realises he is able to carry. His heels, like Colin's, are blooded and blistered. Someone suggested he post some of the backpack's contents home to Canada, but instead, Dan decides at that moment that as he walks, he too will leave pieces behind until he has nothing left to give. With that, he stands up, walks to the rubbish bin and places his single left boot inside. Then he calls across to the children who have spent their afternoon unsuccessfully searching for its mate and gives them the handful of small change, along with a t-shirt each for their trouble. Ellie. Is there a doctor in the house? In classic Camino fashion, the trail grants an unexpected gift just as I need it. Mercedes, our part-time translator, fellow pilgrim and local connection, spots me icing my knee outside the albergue and asks how it is. I lift the bag of ice to show her. She gasps, concerned, and demands I get it looked at, then tells me her aunt is married to a well-known doctor who specialises in high-impact sports injuries. And she's not mentioned this before? As it happens, the man lives on the outskirts of Santo Domingo and is bringing his family to town later that afternoon to meet with her. You have to see him, he can help. Following a phone call, the man generously offers to spare me some time. As agreed, a few hours later, Mercedes' aunt, her husband the doctor, and their young daughter meet us outside the cathedral. Standing there in the street, the doctor examines the injury, poking at the textured clump of fluid around the knee, then asks a handful of questions. Mercedes translates my replies. Satisfied, he then takes a small notepad from his wife's handbag and writes out a makeshift script, initialing the bottom of the page. The man is apparently a very highly respected member of the community, whose authority would not be questioned. He then explains, via Mercedes, that the rainbow display of pastels surrounding the joint is the result of internal bleeding. He says that unless I empty the pack, I have little hope of making it through another week, let alone to Santiago. I thank him for his time, say goodbye to his family, and then return to share the news with Colin. His heel looks worse than my knee. It's a stew of raw flesh and skin adrift. Realising we now have to wait for the pharmacies to open at 10 the next morning before departing, Colin and I jump at the opportunity to sleep in. Bliss.
Colin, Mother Mary Goebbels. I'm having a nightmare. There is an incensed penguin wearing Adolf Eichmann spectacles leaning over me and telling me to get out. Get out. Wait, I want to tell the penguin. You can't say that to me. I'm not Ellie. Let me introduce you to Mother Mary Goebbels, of the Little Sisters of the Peaked. This morning, Mother Mary is mightily pissed off. Pilgrims are supposed to be out of the albergue by 7:45 a.m. After a week of getting up at 4:30, we have committed the mortal sin of sleeping in. We seem to be the last ones left in the albergue. I get up, dress, and get my backpack organised. Ellie takes a little longer. All I have to do is yawn and scratch my balls, but Ellie has this routine, and the routine drives the penguin crazy, like it used to drive me crazy before I got used to it. But Sister Goebbels goes off ranting in Spanish, on and on and on. Ellie ignores her, but I can't. Finally, I round on her and tell her, as politely as I can while she's screaming in my ear and spraying me with the holy spittle, that she is an unholy Catholic Spanish bitch, and will she please back to hell or wherever she came from, because her ranting will not make Ellie move any faster in the mornings, and if it did, I would have tried it. And so, just for this, I get attitude. From a nun, for God's sake. Her eyes bulge dangerously like that cat in Tom and Jerry cartoons when the mouse connects his tail to the mains electricity supply. I'm a mild, sweet-tempered man, as anyone who knows me will tell you, but I would not be hectored by an aged spinster in a penguin costume. So I yell back, and soon we're screaming at each other in our respective languages. I hear her say something about Diablo, the bitch calling me Satan. In return, I may possibly refer to her as a crazy old Catholic bag. The end result is that we're tossed out into the street like drunks out of a bar at closing time. A lifetime of charity and humility and Christian service notwithstanding, Mother Mary slams the heavy oak and iron door in our faces. I swear I saw her give me the finger in the instant before the door shut with a booming thud. It sounded like God closing the book of judgment after the last sorry case. Until now, my only experience of nuns has been solving a problem like Maria in The Sound of Music, which my parents dragged me along to see 3 freaking times when I was 10, so the animosity is a bit of a shock. Let me just say this before we consider the matter closed. If you are ever in Santo Domingo, Mother Mary Goebbels is head torturer and flagellator at the first albergue on the left as you go down Calle Mayor. If you ever stay there, and I wouldn't wish it on a rabid dog, say hello for me.